Welcome. Thank you, Michael and Anthony, for being here with me this morning. Welcome to a conversation that we're having at CommerceSpace for $1996 strike through and replaced with $831.06, which is Anthony's artwork, an exhibition curated by Michael. To start, maybe let's talk a bit about how you arrived at the process of conceiving and also creating this artwork. 1996 strike through replaced by 831.6. It's a direct reference to the process that you went through to create this work. How did it start?
So last year, towards the end of last year, Grappling, who co-founded CommerceSpace, approached me to ask if I'd like to curate something for CommerceSpace's second curatorial series, which will consist of exhibitions curated by invited curators. And it could be solo show or group show, but artistically directed by Grappling herself. The first artist that came to mind was Anthony. I did not approach a few artists to get proposals from them. I only had one person in mind, and that was Anthony. Mainly because I feel that his practice, which is very much revolving around his interest in history of sites, power, geopolitical relationship, have always manifest in very poetic and powerful presentations. And that was there in the first work I saw, which was what he did at the Holland Village Open House. I think it was titled East of Swiss, all the way through one of his recent works, Trophy. In each of these works, there's always a very incisive research into little known or forgotten histories about a place, and then using and transforming materials, very often materials from the site itself, into something else, another object or series of things. I had no idea what he would say when I invited him, but I thought it would be interesting for myself and for the space to host the research and presentation of an artist whose work has always been about history, place, power. I just had a sense that it would be an interesting work. Yeah, so we started talking.
Yeah, Mike came over to my place, or basically my so-called studio. It's a tiny room in my house. And then after that, we went on to a coffee shop chat, which lasted for about 2 hours. And the chat, as it turns out, was mainly dominated by the subject of time and money, because of the deadline that was coming in 2 weeks after when we chat during the chat, and so we had to submit the application like in 2 weeks' time, and we were not quite sure how would the grant application result be like. So. And that really kind of like drove the direction for this project. And that was how it kind of started.
So there was this instinct that you wanted to work together. And when you started having those conversations, time and money were two predominant considerations on your mind. I guess money is something that perhaps, the title itself, money is something that the title references very clearly, and is also such a crucial part of what, allows an exhibition to happen. But how did you go about thinking of money in terms of this project? How did money factor into different parts of the process and finally to the title itself?
So just to add on to what Anthony mentioned about the two recurrent topics, right, time and money, well, we were preparing to apply for an art grant from a local arts awarding institution, art grant awarding institution. So there was that fixed deadline. But there are also questions about how much money would be enough, and how much we should be asking for. And so, yeah, you did put forward that application, yeah.
Yeah. So I did the submission for the grant application. I think by and large, the whole entire project is about responding to this unpredictability and the fact that we never know what really is going to be the outcome of this grant application, which I think most of the artists in Singapore relies on pretty heavily, I would say, because it's just not, it's almost really not sustainable to try to kind of fund your own artwork and create shows using your own money consistently. So we decided that it should be a project that kind of looks at this entire process of how then, if we insist and have the determination to produce a work and put up a show, what is required in bringing the act together. So when the grant application fell through, I went into some mind mapping, thinking about other possibility of getting funds. The other considered methods were like things like ticketing, investment, loan, and eventually we settled on doing a donation drive, just simply because it's the most direct way of achieving the result that we wanted. The other kind of options, I think especially for ticketing, it's a bit, I think it's going to be very challenging. The other two, we can't even justify to ourselves why would someone actually get involved in that process. So when we decided on the donation drive, again, just like the grant application, we didn't know what's going to be the outcome. So it was constantly trying to react to this uncertainty. And when we called for the donation drive, a lot of friends and family members actually responded. However, the result was below expectation. We needed 996 $1 coin to build this pillar within CommaSpace. However, the final result was 831 and 6 cents, which means we only get kind of slightly over half a pillar. And therefore the title, this very complicated and very difficult to verbalize title. So we decided to also at that very last stage, again, it's dealing with the changes, to also keep intact this idea of using the $1 coin. We had discussion between Mike Lopping and myself, because one of the things I wanted to do was, one possible iteration was actually to make the denomination of the coins even smaller by using 5-cent coins. Yeah, because I mean, for two reasons. One is I think poetically, it has a different kind of definition, a different feel to it. But also practically, when you use 5-cent coins to build a pillar, you actually require a lot less money. So a rough calculation, instead of $2,000, almost $2,000, I only need about 190 Sing dollars if I use 5-cent coins. So those were also considerations, and we decided to stick to the $1 coin because during the donation drive, the coin collection, we collected physical $1 coins from the participating donors. So I think the significance of that $1 coin is kind of crucial. So in a way, instead of a complete thinner pillar, we decided to build an incomplete pillar made of $1 coins.
So what I like about the decision of asking for $1 coins as the main material for the installation is that it also harks back to the $1 a brick campaign or donation drive in the early 1960s, when it was announced that Singapore will have its own national theatre. So there's this subtle referencing to the past, which is nice. But I think the specific series of $1 coin that you asked for was for a specific reason too, right?
Yeah, because if you look at the different series of $1 coins, dimensionally and thickness-wise, they are slightly different. If we don't make it consistent, that means using the same kind of coins, I'm going to have a lot of technical challenges when I'm trying to build the pillar. So it's really a pragmatic reason why that is kind of like requested from the donors. However, I think using the latest series of coins has its own kind of implications as well. I mean, being more relevant, more contemporary. Yeah, so.
It sounds like there are two things that came up from what you were sharing, and one is the unpredictability, just how much, each of these different options, because of the fact that it's not so sustainable to consistently fund your own shows, especially in independent spaces, there's always, I suppose, a relationship that needs to be had with an external funding body, be it an art grant awarding institution, as you pointed out, or private investments or different kinds of relationships. But there's just a state of unpredictability that underscores that. And then the second part of what came up in the conversation was also how there's this translation of intangible to tangible, or the invisible to visible, in the process of creating this work. Even with the $1 coin and the kind of significance it carries, it being something that is donated, given in support for the creation of this tangible work. How do you feel about all these different dynamics at play? I mean, even the unpredictability, what really, is at the heart of it is also a relationship or a trust towards this process.
Thanks for bringing up the observation about unpredictability. I think it applies to not just the amount that could be collected from the donation drive, but also the whether this column actually can be physically realized. Yeah, because it's a challenging thing to, install a column that can stand on its own. We were working around a lot of question marks, and we were prepared that, and not to mention, COVID safety management measures. So that shifted the schedule around a little bit as well. But I think all three of us, Robin, Anthony, and myself, were ready for whatever transpires. So, and it really depends. I mean, the responses to the donation drive could span the whole spectrum of no response to overwhelming response. I guess with $831.06, it's some response, and it's an interesting finding. Yeah, so that's the unpredictability part. The part about manifesting the involvement. I think we chose a way of showing the contributions involved in crediting, but we decided not to overshow it. So in a sense, we did not credit we did not name the donated amount to each donor, for example. Yeah.
I think one of the key kind of conceptual idea was to physically enlarge the whatever amount of money that we're going to get eventually to form a piece of work. By doing that, when you convert that monetary value into something that is physical and as large as possible, became kind of like the decision of wanting to use coins by breaking the denomination down so that we can achieve something that's bigger, seemingly bigger. I think in terms of formal quality of the work, I mean it's kind of like trying to build a pretend to be structure within CommaSpace that it's supposed to be an element of support. Right? I mean, being a pillar, being a column. However, when it's made up of currency and it blinks in gold, I thought I like kind of like the sense of irony to it. So I think in a way the precariousness of the work that was eventually done kind of echoes the unpredictable process that transpired. Yeah, and all those, in a way, they were all designed into the entire process. So the final presentation of the work really is only made possible by the donated amount. That determined everything. Yeah.
There's so many different tensions at play, or just forces or relationships from different aspects of the work. I'm also thinking about some mechanisms that were set up, kind of, behind the physical manifestation of this eventual pillar itself, right? It was stated that, depending on the grant or depending on the results of the donation, Anthony would also respond in particular ways, for example, in donating the artist fee or donating proceeds of the work. And that all comes back to, I suppose, that relationship of unpredictability, but also perhaps in wanting to respond towards how others are responding to you, which feels like a more circular kind of conversation, or it's a flowing and ongoing exchange rather than just a unilateral, this is what we're doing, please support us kind of relationship. How did you come up with the decision to include these mechanisms, or how did you decide to perhaps respond in these ways depending on the outcomes?
Should I? Yeah. I think it's firmly rooted in the fact that I do believe that I belong to a certain kind of ecosystem, and when you have an ecosystem, I think it requires that kind of interactivity for it to be for it to perpetuate itself in a way and take on its own form and life. So in this project, I built in this so-called specific responses based on the funding application or the donation drive, simply because I felt that by donating proceeds from the sale, if it gets sold, or when we first applied for the grant and we actually managed to get the grant, is my way of kind of like returning to the ecosystem, and I thought that was pretty important. Not only in terms of not only as a poetic gesture, but I mean in a pragmatic way. They had to be, for me, they had to be spelled out because also practically I'm working with a team, with Robin and with Michael. So I feel that you need to sort of like define what are the follow-up actions when certain events happen. Taking the consideration that we do have fixed costs that we need to cover for the show. I mean, a show is never about just the work. It's about For example, a rental of a space, printing a publication, the curator's fee. Otherwise, how would people like Grappling independent space, Michael as a curator, move on and remain sustainable? So all this has to be kind of defined in a way so that we are all aligned in terms of direction. Yeah.
And so this component of possible sharing of the grant or the additional surplus donation amount back to the community is something that I think maybe reminds us of this artist Kai's Star Artist Grant, where she was donating $1,000 from her pay to any artist who applied to her for it. The difference is that our contribution to the community is dependent on what we get. So again, back to this contingent quality and unpredictable quality of the work. So eventually we're not donating any because we didn't get the grant, and the donation drive amount came under the target. Yeah.
I think the intentions behind wanting to implement these mechanisms into the work, right? Perhaps there's a conversation about pointing to, processes or thoughts that have to go behind making a show and creating a work that are often left unsaid or often, unspoken of even. This idea trying to grapple with value in different ways seems to feature very prominently in the work, be it monetary value, in terms of, how did you manage to come up with the amount, or, there was a very tangible kind of consideration depending on the space, but also more difficult kind of perhaps speculations and calculations towards how to, come up with the grant, for example, that you apply for. This is often an exercise, right, where we kind of just need to imagine different things falling into place, but also the less tangible value in the eventual work, the support that was granted by friends and family, the conversations that are able to be brought up via the work and its value in itself as a statement or a gesture. Through this whole, process and conversation that you have been having around value in its broad sense, I'm wondering what are some of the main things that have perhaps come up as questions or even learnings through this process.
Anthony, maybe we can talk a little bit about the monetary value part. Actually has got various layers, right? The material, the amount of $1 coins we needed, which was 1996, was really art making material, right? So that was the bare minimum for the possibility of the column of coins to even be possible. And then there is labor, right? And production cost, that adds up to about $6,000. Yeah. What is really interesting and generous of the artist Anthony here is that we worked out a way for myself, Grappling, and the artist to hold off our payment until there is some kind of closure in the form of somebody buying the work. Yeah. So that is significant because in the usual scenario, the curator, for example, may come into a project, get a fee of X number of dollars, and then the curator is kind of out of the equation, and the selling of the work usually is split equally between the artist and the dealer. Yeah, but we made this 3 ways equal split for this special occasion. Yeah.
I think the Michael brought up that kind of like the hidden layer in trying to make a show happen. I mean, the total value, which is the very, very bare minimum that we needed, was close to $7,000. So I had to rope in a good friend of mine to become the top-up donor. Because, I mean, all we got really is $831, which is used in the creating of the work, the artwork itself. Then the rest of the expenses are basically kind of not covered. So involving a friend or family member as a form of support to sustain an art practice, I mean, I think really, I mean, what we're trying to discuss here, it's a very old question. And I don't think I have new answers. You know, I think the project was already sort of a process of struggling to meet constant changes. So in a way, the artwork itself, the Pillar of Coins, it's not a solution. You know, it's just raising the same old question, really. You know, and presenting it maybe in a slightly different way.
I think there's a lot of honesty to that as well, right? Not just in the process of, for example, you know, how the proceeds would be split, as Michael pointed out, but also in the work. I suppose a very honest and self-reflexive and also revealing conversation that you're putting forth and hoping to have with the audiences. I think anyone, you know, looking at this title understands there was a process behind how the work came into being, but also perhaps can be invited to think about, you know, the different ways in which this question that sits at the heart of the work really factors into all states of art making and art viewing and art consuming. I feel like, you know, the work is like putting forth this space and inviting people to come and engage with a question that we all know of and has on our mind, but often don't have the platform to speak about. And it feels like an invitation, rather, to have this conversation. Maybe just, you know, one last question. I'm curious about what are some of the conversations then that have come up since this work, from the donation to now, has been kind of put forth in public consciousness?
Actually, maybe I can raise 2 of them. One was me wondering whether I should actually top up some money, right? Whether I should be one of the donors. I decided not to, mainly because I was interested in finding out. I was interested in empirical findings, like if I do not intervene, what would we get? The other thing that came up was some donations were rather performative. I think, yeah, you can talk about, I think, yeah, one of them actually donated multiple times.
Yeah. So because we asked for $1,996 as a target for the donation drive, someone actually donated 4 times, $1, $9, $9, and $6. And then there was another individual donated $19.96, which made it like, I mean, the 6 cents is like, I don't know what to do with it. That's why it's in the space as a separate stack. There were interesting reactions from the public, of those who visited the space and saw the work. I also had conversations with the more informed individuals who knew about how really 80% of Singapore's art funding comes from the government. So comparing that to like our neighboring countries around the region, where predominantly funding really comes from patrons and collectors. So in a way, it has a very different kind of power dynamics. the art market, the art practice, artists themselves were actually driven in a very different way. Is it better? Is it worse off? I have no answer. Maybe it's wishful thinking. It would be nice if we had kind of more collectors and patrons who will be in support, or in fact are invested in this idea of art creation. I think that kind of like will balance the ecosystem a little bit better. But however, that's not really controllable, right? Especially as an individual artist.
That does remind me a bit of, perhaps it can be seen in parallel to the ways that this team has approached this exhibition, right? If there's something that's being given to the creation of the work, then there's an intention from your side to give it back. This idea of, I suppose, supporting the ecosystem really, and recognizing the circular conversation that is always being had within like an art, industry or ecosystem within a particular kind of place. And I think it's quite poignant to see the ways in which this conversation has been held for this exhibition. Those were really all my questions, but I was wondering if there's anything that you wanted to bring up or anything you wanted to also mention that we haven't yet touched on.
Just like to basically say thank you to Grappling, Commaspace, and Michael for making the work possible. I really enjoyed the project very much, even though it's in constant flux. Of course, the donors who made the work possible, though not to our target, but I think we managed to still end up with kind of like a new way of starting an old conversation.
So for myself, I would like to thank Grappling as well for her open-mindedness. We worked together on various projects over the years. I was in her first curatorial series, 12 Solos, of Commaspace, and it was really enjoyable. And I really want to thank her for letting this working relationship carry on. And I'm glad that we managed to work out something and create this very powerful installation. We were working on various proposals before, and I think this work became possible because of a kind of three-way dialogue with Commaspace and Grappling, as well as the generosity and open-mindedness of Grappling as the artistic director. So thank you, Grappling. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Clara, for being here, because we have been working so hard to build the thing. And this has been a great time to reflect on the different themes of the project. Yeah.
Thank you for trusting in me and for sharing so generously and honestly in this conversation. I think even though we've had a chance to talk a bit about the work prior, even through this conversation, so many more kind of dynamics started to come up and really made me think about just how much more exists in this work, or how much it can bring up through its, physical state. So thank you.
Thank you.